Bueno, perfecto. Yo creo que ya las personas se siguen conectando. Así que buenos días. Es un gusto saludarles. Muchas gracias por conectarse a este diálogo virtual,
So good morning, and
en
thank you
el que
for
estaremos intercambiando
logging
información
into
acerca de las
this
mediciones
virtual
y la
dialogue where
toma
we're
de
going to be
decisiones en
talking
el marco de
about
los
the
avances en el
measurements
sistema de cuidados para Chile.
for the
Mi nombre
design
es
of
Karen
decision
García
making for a
Rojas,
system of
soy
care for
estadística de
Chile.
la
My
División de
name is
Estudios de Género de
Karen
la
Garcia
CEPAL
Rojas,
y soy parte
and
de la
I'm
comunidad de
in
práctica para
ICLAC,
las
and I'm part
mediciones
of
de la
the
sociedad de
community of
cuidado
practice
en
for the measurements
Comunidad Este,
for
evento.
the Society of
Esta
Care and
comunidad
organizer
tiene el
of this committee.
objetivo de proveer un
The
espacio técnico
objective
de
is to
intercambio de
provide a technical
experiencias,
space to
conocimientos,
exchange
recomendaciones y también
experiences, but
preguntas
also to
relacionadas con la
ask
medición de los
questions
cuidados,
regarding
con el fin de
the
contribuir al
system of
fortalecimiento y a
care
la
in order
producción
to
de datos
contribute towards the
estadísticos para
production
la
of
construcción de
statistical
sociedades
data
del cuidado
for
en América
building
Latina y
the
el Caribe.
societies of cares in Latin
Me gustaría
America and the
mencionar, para
Caribbean.
iniciar, que la
I would
sociedad
like to
del
say
cuidado fue
that the
planteado como un
society of
paradigma
care
propuesto por la
is
CEPAL
a
y
paradigm
avalado
that
por
has
sus
been
estados
established by the
miembros
ICLAC
durante
and
el
has been
Compromiso de
adopted by
Buenos
the
Aires en
member states through the
2022
Buenos Aires
y
Agreement
la
in
la 15ª
2022
Conferencia Regional sobre la
during the
Mujer en América Latina y el
15th
Caribe, y
regional
se ha
meeting.
planteado la sociedad del
And
cuidado como un
it
horizonte y
has been
camino
placed,
para
it
una
has been
recuperación
considered as
transformadora,
the path
sostenible y con
for a
equidad.
sustainable
La sociedad del
transformation
cuidado pone
pathway
en el centro el
with
principio feminista de la
equality.
sostenibilidad
The
también,
feminism is
reconoce la
placed as one of the
interdependencia entre
most
las
important
personas,
topics,
la
and it
dimensión
acknowledges
ambiental y el desarrollo económico y
the
social
economic
en forma
development and
sinergia,
social development
incluyendo
as
el
a
autocuidado, el
synergy,
cuidado de las personas, el cuidado
considering
de quienes
the
cuidan y el cuidado del
self-care,
planeta.
the care of care
También me
providers
gustaría
too,
mencionar que la
and the care
comunidad de
for the
práctica es una
planet.
iniciativa en
This
el marco del
community
trabajo
of practice is
conjunto
a
entre el
community
INEGI y el Mujeres de
between
México, ONGs
INEGI,
y la
Women in
CEPAL, en
Mexico,
el
Women,
contexto de la red de transmisión de conocimiento de la
UN
Conferencia
Women, and
Estadística de las
ICLAC,
Américas, una
as
red
part of
coordinada
the
por el INE de
statistics
Chile, y
organization
también en
from
articulación con la Alianza
the
Global de los
Americas,
Cuidados.
but also with the
Les
alliance
recuerdo
of
que este evento
global
cuenta
states.
con
So
interpretación
we
simultánea,
do
así
have
que para la
simultaneous
comunidad
interpretation.
angloparlante puede
So
elegir
for those
italiano
that who only speak
traducción.
English, you can select the
Y en este
English
marco, la
language.
propuesta del
And
diálogo de
within the
hoy
framework here, then
es
the
que podamos
proposal
ver
is
juntos
that
juntos las
we can together
potencialidades
see
de dos
the
tipos de mediciones
potentials of two
diferentes.
different
Por un
types
lado,
of
recuperaremos sobre
measurements.
el
On the one
tiempo
hand,
una de las metodologías
a survey
más
on
queridas y más
the
importantes para visibilizar la
time use,
evidencia sobre
which
la
is
división
very
sexual del
important to
trabajo
see the division
por
of a
parte del
sexual
INE,
allocation of
y
work.
por otro
This on behalf
lado,
of the
tener
NSI, but
una
also we're
presentación
going
sobre
to
registros
have a
administrativos de parte de
presentation
la
on
Secretaría de Desarrollo
administrative
Social,
records from the
que
Ministry of
son
Social
dos dimensiones
Development,
que nutren
which
un
are
mismo
types
propósito,
of
que es
measurements
las
that
políticas de
feed the same
cuidados
purpose,
encaminadas
which
hacia la
is the
igualdad de
policies
género.
of care moving
El
towards
panel será moderado por
gender
nuestra
equality.
colega Evelyn
And it will
Taranas,
be monitored
analista
by
de
Evelyn
estudios y
Taranas,
documentación
an
del Ministerio de
analyst
Género y
of
Equidad
studies,
Pública
and
de Chile,
also
y
from
veremos
the
más
Minister of
preámbulos.
Gender
Las
and
invito
Equity
a dejar
in
sus
Chile.
preguntas en
So
el
I
chat
would like to ask
durante
you
las
to participate,
presentaciones.
to leave your questions
Ya
in the
disponerse
chat,
para un intercambio
and
técnico
to
nutrido,
be
que
available for a
disfrutaremos de una
wonderful
práctica
conversation and to
en el
take
marco
advantage of
de la
this
Comunidad
space
Estadística de la región
for
y de la
within the
experiencia realizada
framework
en las
of
políticas públicas
the
para la igualdad de
community
género.
interested in public
Adelante,
policies
Evelyn.
for gender
Muchas
equality.
gracias por
So
acompañarnos
Evelyn,
en
the
el
floor is
análisis.
yours. Thank you for being with us in
Muchas
monitoring this
gracias,
panel.
Karen. Buen día
Well,
a
thank
todas
you,
las personas
Karen.
que
I
se
would
están
like to
conectando.
welcome all of the
Es un
people that
agrado
are
con mucha especial
that are
que
connecting,
saludamos el Día
and it
Internacional de
is
la
a
Mujer y la
pleasure
Igualdad de
for
Género
us
desde la
to
ciudad de
greet you
Santiago,
from
de
the
Chile.
city of
Y
Santiago, from the
agradecemos
Ministry
la
of Women
invitación a
and
participar de este valioso
Gender
espacio
Equality. And we would like
en
to
la
ask
calidad de
you to enjoy
moderadora
this
de la
event.
conferencia.
In my case,
Es
I'm
un
going to be
espacio muy
chairing and
importante
moderating
para toda
this
la región y en el marco,
event.
como
It's
también
very
señalaban
important, as Karen
de
was
la comunidad de
saying,
práctica para la
as part
medición
of
del
this
cuidado de la red
community of
de
practice for
nutrición
the
de la infancia.
development of the
Agradecemos
network.
muy especialmente
I
a la
would like
CEPAL,
to
al
thank
equipo de
ICLAC
Medición y
and the
Género
team of
del
Gender
Instituto
Affairs,
Nacional de
the
Estadísticas Chile,
National
por la
Institute of
organización de este
Chile,
webinar
for
y por
organizing
supuesto
this
a todas las
webinar,
personas
and of
que
course,
se han
everybody else
conectado y que prontamente
who
también
are here
continuarán conectándose.
connected and who will remain
Este
connected for the
webinar,
rest of
como
the session.
señalaba Karen,
This
lleva por
webinar,
título
as Karen
Avances
has said,
hacia,
is
sistema
called
para Chile,
Advances Towards a
mediciones
System of
para la
Care
toma
for
de
Chile,
decisiones.
Measurements
Y
for
nos
Decision
encuentra en un momento
Making.
muy importante
And it
del
finds us
país,
in a very
en el
interesting
que estamos
place as a
avanzando
country
hacia
because
la
we're moving
articulación
forward
de un sistema
towards
nacional
an
de cuidados.
articulation of a national
Y
system for
desde ese
support
lugar,
and care.
con
And
otros sistemas de información
Having information systems that are articulated and standardized and prompt has become quite a challenge. So from the survey's point of view and the evidence and diagnosis based on evidence, Chile had its first approach in the year 2007 and 2008 for measuring care under an exploratory survey of time use. And then with the first national survey on the time of use in 2015, which was carried out by the National Statistics Institute, the NSI. Also, the articulation of a care system, which has been in the discussion for several countries, putting it as part of the agenda. The importance that it has is something that can be reflected in the local support network as a big challenge for our territory for the interoperability in our programming. So addressing these two components, these two areas, and thinking about the importance of the national information systems in order to respond to the challenges of the society of care as a critical pillar for a social well-being. In this case, then we're going to have two presentations with two panel members with vast experience in social measurements and evidence for the decision-making and public policies. So I would like to greet Verónica Valdivia, who is a senior analyst from the National Statistics Institute, and also Romy Aramos, head of the promotion department from the Ministry of Social Development in Chile. So we are going to then begin with Verónica and her presentation, which will address the methodological changes that focused on the set of questions and modules that are related to care, which have updated the second national survey on time use in Chile and the experience that the NSI has had with its pilot program, but also with the official collection of information. And before passing the floor to Verónica, Romy will present on the information systems developed in the framework of the strategy for the implementation of the national care systems with a focus on the tools for management at the territorial level. So Verónica, the floor is yours. Well, thank you so much for having invited me for that introduction, but also for giving me space to contribute towards these dialogues, which we believe are very important that we have. Karen, please, can you help me by sharing my presentation?
Claro. Dame un segundo. También la puedes compartir desde tu pantalla si te sientes más
You
cómodo.
can also share it from your own screen if you wish to do so, but if you prefer, I can do it. Yes, please, I would like to ask you to help me out with that.
No hay problema.
No problems.
Bueno, comentarles mientras hacemos los ajustes.
Well, in the meantime, I would like to say that after her presentation, we will open up the space for a Q&A. The same thing after the presentation delivered by Romy. And then, before closing, we will have a more global exchange space with all of the people participating.
Perfecto, ahí se ve correctamente.
Okay, can you see that well?
¿Me escuchan? Ahí está viendo.
Karen, ahora creo que puedo compartir.
Okay, I can share it now.
Yo ya lo estoy compartiendo.
I'm sharing it already.
Sí, que me dice que no, para poder yo compartir.
Yes, but in order for me to share, you need to stop sharing.
Vale. Perdón la confusión.
Okay, I can do it now. I'm sorry for this confusion. Just give me a second.
Ahora sí que sí. Debería poder verse, ¿cierto? Ahora se está viendo como...
Okay, you should be able to see it.
Sí, falta ponerlo en modo presentación.
Yes, you just need to put it in slideshow mode.
Ahí sí. Ahí sí, ¿cierto?
That's
Perfecto.
okay now. Yes, it is.
Perdón por
Perfect
la
now.
tardanza.
My
Bueno,
apologies.
muchas gracias, como les decía, por
Anyway,
generar
thank
este
you so
espacio también
much
para
for
compartir
creating this
sobre
space,
estos,
for allowing me to share
para
information on this
avanzarnos más.
topic, and let
Sin
us
más
go
preámbulo,
straight
introducción.
into it. Just as a
Pensar
means
que
of
hasta
introduction,
2021, 23
until
países en América Latina y el
2021,
Caribe
22
habían
countries
realizado
in Latin
mediciones
America and the
tecnológicas
Caribbean
de
had conducted official
siendo
measurements on
acá, como
time
bien nos ha
use.
mencionado Evelyn,
And as Evelyn has
Chile
already
actualmente,
mentioned, in
la
Chile,
2015,
we had the
primera
first
versión oficial
NUT,
con representatividad
the
a la
first
nación.
official version with a
Teniendo eso en
full
consideración,
national
y gracias a esta
representativeness.
tremenda inversión,
And
se
thanks to
pudieron
this
ir
first
observando
version, we were
ciertas
able
desigualdades que
to
no son
see
capturadas en otras
certain
preguntas
inequalities that are not
en diversas
contemplated or
dimensiones,
captured in
siendo
other
una de ellas
surveys in
obviamente el
several
trabajo,
dimensions. And obviously, one of them is
donde
work.
obviamente también
And obviously,
podemos ver que sin
here,
importar
you can
muchas
see
veces un
that
montón de distintas
there
características,
are
solo
many
es
different
posible observar
characteristics.
distintas brechas de
We can
género que son
see lots of
importantes.
gender gaps, which
Y
are
un
very
ejemplo de ello
important.
es justamente
And one
este gráfico
example
que
of
les vengo a
this is
traer acá,
precisely this
que
graph that I'm
presenta el
showing
tiempo
here,
promedio dedicado al
which
trabajo por
shows
tiempo
average
remunerado
time
según
dedicated
sexo y
to
etapa
unpaid
básica
care
laboral
work by
en un
sex
día
and
tipo.
stage of household
Y
life
nos
on a
muestra,
typical
sin
day.
importar
And as
la
you can
etapa de
see
vida en la
this,
que se encuentren, las
regardless of
mujeres
the
siempre
stage in
dedican
their
más
life,
al
women
trabajo por
always
tiempo remunerado.
dedicate more time
Si
to
se fijan, de hecho,
unpaid
la
care
brecha
work. In fact,
específicamente
the gap
entre
itself
hogares con
between
hijos de 0 a
households
5
with
años
children
o
between
hogares
0 and
con
5
hijos
or
de
with
6 a 12 años en
children
el hogar,
between
la
6 and
diferencia entre
12,
hombres y
the
mujeres es
difference
muy
between
grande.
men and women is very, very large.
Entonces, obviamente también con
So
esto,
obviously with
gracias
this,
justamente a este tipo de fenómenos
thanks
que vamos
to this
estudiando
kind of
con la
phenomenon that we
tecnología del
have been
tiempo, es
studying with
posible
these
visibilizar
time use
este
surveys,
tipo de
we can
desigualdades,
see these
lo
type
que
of
obviamente
inequalities,
entra no
which
solo también a ser un aporte
obviously
en lo
not
que es la
only
política
is it
pública, sino
then
que
a
también a
contribution for public
posicionar justamente
policies,
el
but it
impacto de
also helps
survelas
to
en U
position the
como
importance of
una
these
cuestión necesaria a
surveys
tener en
as
el
a
sistema de
necessary survey
información.
to have as part of the national statistics
Y
system.
entonces ahora, hablando
And
ya
so
de la
now
segunda NUT,
going into the
recientemente nos
second
tocó retomar
survey,
esta
ENUT,
segunda versión que previamente había
we
sido
have just
suspendida por la
implemented
pandemia.
this second
Y
survey because
acabo
it
de
had
ver,
originally been
digamos, como
suspended by
objetivo
the
para esta segunda
pandemic.
versión,
And the objective then for
obtener
this second
información de
version
cómo
is to obtain
personas, los
information on how
alumnos y
people
los
aged 12 and over
principalmente en
use
torno
their
al
time,
trabajo no
primarily
remunerado,
focusing
al
on
trabajo en ocupación
unpaid
y
work,
actividades que
working
se
their
realizan,
occupation,
además de pruebas e
and
información
personal
relacionada a
activities,
su
as well as
calidad
providing
de vida
information related
durante
to
ese
their
tiempo
quality of
en
life
las
and
principales
well-being
zonas urbanas
regarding
del
the
país.
time used in the country's main
Naturalmente aquí
urban
buscando
areas.
tener una
Now, obviously,
representatividad a
here
nivel
trying
nacional
to
y
have
nacional por supuesto.
representativeness by region, but also
Entonces, también
nationally
respecto de las
by
principales
gender.
definiciones
So,
metodológicas de la
regarding the
segunda
main
versión,
methodological
en
definitions
efecto,
of this
primero de
second
tipo enmarca,
version,
nosotros
let
utilizamos
me
un
talk about the
listado de
type of
actividades,
instruments. We use a
donde aquí
list of
también nosotros
activities,
contamos
and here
con un
we have
formulario
a
dedicado a
questionnaire
preguntas
which is
del
dedicated
hogar de las
to
personas de características
household
generales
questions,
de quienes
general
componen este hogar.
activities of
Y
those
también
who
tenemos
make
otro
up the
cuestionario
household.
relativo a las
And we
preguntas
have
sobre
another
género,
one
que
related
justamente
to
brinda luz
time
en el
use,
campo
which
destinado a
precisely
tareas
tries to
domésticas.
find the
Y al
activities that
igual
are
que la
carried
segunda
out in a
NUT, nosotros
certain
también tenemos un tipo
day.
de informante
And we also have
que es también la
informants.
categoría para el caso del
The
cuestionario
ideal
y un informante
informant
directo
for this survey
para
and a direct informant or respondent
la fecha de nuestro tiempo,
for
donde
the
este se
time use
compone de
questionnaire, and
personas
it's
de 12
usually
años
made
y
up of
más.
people who are 12 years
Nuestro
old
periodo de
or
referencia
older.
son 2 días asignados por ser a cada
The
vivienda,
that time of
un día a la
reference
semana, un día
is
entre semana, y tenemos un registro
dwelling
horizontal
weekday,
donde el
weekend
hogar es
day,
visitado hasta
and the
tener
household is visited until
todas las personas que
the
estuvieron en el hogar
interviews of all
10
the members that
días con
make
un
up
cupo
the
máximo de
household
14
are
días,
considered with
¿ya?
a maximum
En
deadline of
general, todo esto que les
14
vengo
days.
diciendo
And
guarda
everything that
más
I
o
have been
menos las
mentioning
mismas
here
similitudes
is
en
quite
su
similar
mayoría con
to
2015 y donde
the
existe
one
una
that was
mayor
held in
regulación justamente
2015,
no
and
representa que
there's no major
nosotros ahora vamos a ocupar
methodological
o ocupamos
changes.
para esta funcionalidad
Here, what
un
we
dispositivo
use
móvil de captura
is
que
a
realiza lectura
mobile
postnatal,
device to capture the information, that is to say,
glosas
a
en
tablet.
todo el MOPI.
It's
Y
the
esto permite generar
CAPI
una
tablet.
diferencia bastante
This
grande
is the
respecto a la
method,
primera versión,
and
en la que
that
nosotros
made
usábamos
a
papel.
change because the first version was done
Desde una
on paper.
perspectiva del GSBPM,
From the
como contexto,
GSPM
digamos,
perspective and providing a
cómo funciona, digamos,
context
todo el
here,
proceso
how
estadístico de esta
this
segunda
whole
versión,
statistical process
el
works,
GSBPM es un
the
modelo que
GSPPM is
viene
a
definido
model that defines groups of processes for this information. In the year 2022, When activating the second node, we created different stages, and there was a detection and there was a need established according to certain key actors or participants given the contingency of a design of the system of care. There was also a design and a planning done for the project, and we started creating everything related to questionnaires. In the year 2023, that means last year, we kept on working on the construction, but also the collection of data. We created a pilot stage March and May, and also we updated the collection and processing inputs, as well as official field work during or between August and December. And where are we right now? We are currently working in the processing and data analysis so as to be able to present a publication by the end of the year. And it is now that I will be focusing in the different initiatives that we carried out, the methodological adjustments, all created or related to care in the design. So this is using the full wealth of actors that we had when talking to the different public policies, and it allowed us to work much better for the adjustment of some of the questionnaires. In measuring care, we included different aspects of the questionnaire that will be helping those that create public policy, especially when taking into account that from the 2022, we started working in the national design of the national system of care. We have two questionnaires, as already mentioned, one for households and the other one that is related to time use, that wants to delve into these activities and the time assigned to these areas. We have these 5 initiatives that are specifically related to the measure of care, and I will be presenting 2 that are related to the household questionnaire and 3 that are for the time of use. The first one is the identification of the primary caregiver. The main obstacle that we found was the definition of primary caregiver along different national services in Chile. Surveys, my apologies. There are different definitions for them. And additionally, there was no consensus in which was the concept needed here to carry out these public policies. So we use 2 concepts. The first one is the primary caregiver, defining it as the person that usually dedicates most of their time in the care of the recipients with functional dependency. What does this mean? We identify them by applying the short survey of the Washington group that require help or assistance in their daily activities. And the second concept used was the primary and secondary responsible for care, those who usually make decisions regarding the care of the recipient used for care towards people aged between 0 to 14 years of age. This was based on the longitudinal survey for childhood. Now, related to this, it was important to establish this distinction among these questions because we would have a clear understanding of what we are measuring, and thus we would avoid errors when training the surveyors. Having said this, we also add the identification and discussion of the pertinency of using one or other element, and what are we going to understand as primary caregiver from here on. A second initiative related to this activity in the household questionnaire was the access to caregiving services. In the help module for households, we already have questions that are delving into whether they are receiving aid either paid or unpaid for the domestic activities and care. And those people that were working with public policies requesting the possibility of adding a new section and looking for certain populations that require care and those that are under functional dependency and the caregiver of caregiving for children between 0 to 14 to identify access and needs, specific needs for certain systems of care. What we did was to survey in these populations and we asked whether they have access to these services and if they did, to please allow us to specify the type of institutions, whether paid, if they're private, public payment, if it's unpaid, public or public, private or others. For those people that do not have this access, we then identified whether they require it. If it was necessary, then to be able to delve into this area and to specify the main reason why they did not have any access to this care system. And now, going into the time use questionnaire, we redesigned the module, and to consider the redesign for the module of the first note, this was divided in 5 sections, all based on the age of the recipient, but also whether they required permanent health care. This is a practice that is quite common when using lists for Latin America and the Caribbean. And for each sector, we use for similar activities how it is presented in the example that we have here. And we added some adaptation to the sentencing depending on the population. With this design, there are certain main concerns, of course, with regard to quality and the result of the measurement. First, when doing this, this questionnaire is extended as all these activities have to be repeated in almost all sections. Additionally, it was proven by different studies done by a Mexican colleague that when carrying out this activity, there's a possibility for double counting of the situations of care and underestimating, therefore, the results. Inspired then by the Colombian Inut, we redesigned the module and we were able to reduce the questionnaire, avoiding the priority of certain activities compared to others. In the second note, we divided the module in 3 sections per type of care. First, with essential care for household members. The second one is related to education of the participants in that home and other activities. Before requesting for the time, we were asking the time use of these people, and we allowed to create specific populations for the analysis requested by those that create the public policies, meaning that if the ministry would require specifically only the care of children between 0 to 12 years of age, this could be done here. This redesign was first implemented partially in the pilot project to then verify that this would be working properly. And when obtaining good results in those pilot projects, we then, in the official questionnaire, we defined the whole questionnaire, and it is applied for all questions for care, these type of questions that I have as examples here. Additionally, we incorporated the possibility of recording total time dedicated to each activity for those cases that do not be reporting dedicated time for this activity on a separate point or bullet point by each of the caregivers. And this was done because if I, for example, am feeding 2 children at the same time, I could not report it separately because I am doing it at the same time. Therefore, when adding total time destined to this activity, we can avoid measurement errors. Another crucial element was the approach of the capture of the simultaneous activity. It is very well known that one of the disadvantages of these activities is the non-possibility of capturing secondary activities by affecting the time estimates that are recorded in different
Este
activities.
módulo experimental nos
This
permite
experimental
entonces
module allows us then
analizar
to
también
analyze
los impactos en términos de
the
los indicadores que uno podría
impact
tener
in
y analizar justamente también
terms of
las
indicators,
subpoblaciones
and thus
que
analyze
justamente
the subpopulation
dedican o
that
realizan
can
más actividades de manera
dedicate or carry
simultánea.
out more
Esto
activities on a
obviamente también
simultaneous fashion. And of
impacta
course, all this will
el
impact
bienestar también de las personas,
the
porque si estoy
well-being
haciendo
of
dos
these
actividades de manera
individuals. If I
simultánea,
am
voy a estar
carrying
mucho más
out
agotada, así
simultaneous
que puedo
activities, I
dedicar
will be far
tiempo
more
exclusivo a
tired,
hacer
and I
ciertas
can
cosas, ¿cierto?
dedicate time to
Y
certain
este
different
módulo tiene dos
activities.
secciones.
This
La
module has
primera
two sections.
busca
The
indagar
first
sobre una
one
actividad simultánea por
wants
parte de
to
cuidados y
define
otra en
simultaneous
trabajo
activities
doméstico.
in care, and the other one in
Y la
domestic
segunda
activities or
tiene
home activities.
espacios
And
en
the
blanco,
second one
como se muestra acá en
has
el circulito
white
morado,
areas, as is
que
shown in
busca
the purple
rellenar
circle,
justamente dos pares de
that
variables
wants to fill
precodificadas
in the
que
activities that
obviamente
are
estas están
pre-coded,
enmarcadas
and they
en
are
el mismo cuestionario
linked
sobre el uso del tiempo.
to the same questionnaire for time use.
Y por último, algo que también hicimos
And
fue
something
poder capturar
else
las
that we
percepciones de
already did
cuidadores, de
was
los
to
CEPALes, de
capture the
responsables
perception of
principales y
the
responsables
primary
secundarios y
caregiver
los
or
vividores,
primary and secondary responsible for care.
justamente para vincular también con
And thus be able to link
la
this
información de uso del tiempo.
to the information
Por
of
un lado,
time use.
nosotros acá agregamos dos
On one
subgrupos.
hand,
La
we
primera
added two
enfocada a
sections. The
cuidadores
first one
principales,
is
los
focused in
cuales se
primary
basaron
caregivers, the
en
ones that were
escala de CEPAL.
based on
Y una
the
segunda
CEPAL scale, and
enfocada
the second one
en
that is
los responsables
focused
principales y
in
secundarios,
the
personas
primary and
antes
secondary
de
responsible for
0 a 14
care
años.
of people
Lo que
aged
obviamente
between
también
0
es de
to
cobra relevancia
14.
analizar,
And
pensando
of
también
course,
en
it
la
is
responsabilidad
quite
social y el
relevant when
género en
thinking
cuidados.
about social responsibility and
Muchas
gender
gracias.
of caregivers. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Verónica, por tu detallada
Thank you, Veronica, for
presentación
your
con la
detailed
introducción
presentation
de estos nuevos
and
elementos
for the introduction of
en esta
these new
versión
elements in this
del uso
second
del
version
tiempo
of
INUT,
the
esta
time use
segunda INUT,
survey,
que
INUT,
es
or
realizada en la Red
second INUT
Nacional
national
de
survey on
Estadísticas.
time use in Chile that is carried out by the Statistics
Vamos
Institute
a
in Chile,
pasar
INEGI.
rápidamente
We will
esta ronda de
now
preguntas
open the floor for
en la
questions.
comunidad.
Are there any questions
No sé
in this
si
community?
has percibido alguna, Karen, o
Maybe,
porque en el chat
Karen,
no hay
you have
ninguna
received any,
pregunta.
because in the chat we have no
No
questions.
tenemos preguntas por ahora.
No,
No
perfecto.
questions so far.
Bueno, entonces pasamos a la segunda
Okay, we will
presentación
now then go to our second
de
presentation,
Romy Álamo.
Romy Alamo.
Como decía antes,
As previously mentioned,
Romy es jefa de la División de Promoción
Romy
y
is the
Protección
head
Social
of the
en el
Promotion
Instituto
and
de
Social
Estadísticas
Protection
de Chile. Te damos la
Department
palabra,
of the
Romy.
Social Department in Chile.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Muy buenos días
Hello,
a
how are
todos,
you
a
doing?
todos.
Thank
Muchísimas
you.
gracias por
Good
el
morning to
espacio.
all, and thank
Nosotros
you very much
nos
for this
gustaría contarles
opportunity.
un poco
We
de cómo
wanted
estamos
to let you
articulando
know how
la
we are
oferta del sistema social
creating or
en la
providing the
comunidad en
offer
los distintos
of
territorios y en ese
caregiving
sentido,
and
cómo
support in
estamos
different
hoy día
territories, and
accionando
how
en
we
términos
are
de
nowadays
registro
working
de
in
la
terms
información,
of
pero también del
the
uso de ella.
registry of
Quizás
the information, but also
parte
the use
de
of
esta
it.
presentación va a ser mucho más
Maybe the
enfocada a
emphasis
cómo
of this
usamos el sistema
information
social
will
local
be
que
more in
tenemos,
how we use the
más que
information
cómo
that we
la
have,
obtenemos, pero la
more
idea
than
es que
how
podamos
we
contarles un
obtain it. But the
poquito
idea is to be
de
able to
todo. Así que
let you
voy a
know about all
compartir
this, and I will be
pantalla,
now sharing my screen.
que ustedes me cuentan si
And you let me know if you can see it.
la ven en modo presentación.
Can you see it as a presentation?
La vemos en el modo presentación
Yes, we see it
que
as a
aparece en la
presentation.
anterior diapositiva y la segunda.
Yes.
Sí. Ting, ting. Ahí, tampoco.
Can you see it now?
Ahí sí.
Ahí se ve.
Yes, we can see it now.
¿Alguien más puede corroborar?
Perfecto,
Sí, ahí se ve
perfectamente.
Sí.
Buenísimo. Muchas gracias. Bueno,
Well,
contarles un poco
thank you so
qué es
much.
gestión
Now, let
social
me
local
tell
y cómo
you
nos hemos
what
estado
Gestión Social Local
desarrollando
is and how
justamente
we have
este
been
sistema que es más que un
developing
sistema
this system, which is really not a system, it's rather a management model at the local level in order to organize the social local information available. We're in the current process of designing the national system for support and care, and for this, a interministerial committee was put together, which is being led by the Ministry of Social Development, together with the Minister of Women and Gender Equity. We have a technical secretariat with different undersecretaries from the different departments and ministries, and we are in charge of the supply, of the offer. That is to say, the different services that the system will make available for the caregivers, for those who require care, also within the framework of this larger system. So it was very important for us to move forward on how we're going to manage the data and how we're going to create those intersectorial effective models. Basically, just as a general context, social policy in Chile, in general, is designed by the ministries, Ministry of Social Development, but we also have different programs in health, education, the Ministry of Women and Gender Equity, but are implemented through the municipalities. We also have some organizations, some large foundations that implement part of our programs through collaboration agreements with the ministries. But the way that it generally works is that the ministries develop the guidelines and the methodologies for the different programs, the methodological design of the programs, and then that is transferred to the local space through the municipalities, and it is the municipalities who execute then the social policy. So in Chile, which has 360 municipalities, it's a very long but thin country with important distances between cities with a complex territorial distribution. So although at the central level, programs can be developed, the way that it actually unfolds in the local level, how we can collect the information and how we can create the learnings based on those programs is a challenge in itself. And at a local level, also how all of those programs that have been designed centrally can actually come to life and supplement each other. It's something that is complicated too. Children, for example, children or young people who are outside of the school system. That is a social problem which is addressed by 5 different ministries with different points of view. And education on the one side, prevention services on the other hand. We assume that there may be abuse of substances, so there are programs for that. We have social security programs. For example, we try and get those young children because they might be in an unsafe situation. We have the Children's Social Protection Network. So for one same family, one case, we can get to them through different angles, and that is also repeated with different types of social programs. So how can we start integrating this? This is what we have been working on. So what is GSL? It's a management system for social care cases in these subnational spaces, local, provinces, and regional, but with an important focus on the local through the municipalities, as I was just saying. How we can get to the 345 municipalities that we have in Chile this year, we are precisely in the process of implementing this, because it's not only just an information system, it's a management system. So all of the technical support to the professionals in the municipalities has to be provided in order to adopt the system. But it's not mandatory, and that's something that's very important too. The government cannot force these changes or changes on the management system in the municipalities, but rather we carry out a collaborative work with them so that we can put together a design that can be relevant to their needs, but that is also helpful for the social workers that are in a given municipality. And then the way that this works, we implement the system which allows to have access to the administrative data that the state has all for a given family, for a given household. Not only the social, socioeconomic record, but other data like health data, like employment and others too. And that allows us to have a more holistic view of the family group, as thorough and comprehensive as possible, but it also allows us to have a more proactive and integrative, comprehensive approach. And now, before GSL, a person would go to the municipality and would say, I'm here because I would like to know how I can apply for a housing subsidy. And the social worker would provide them with the appropriate information, probably will ask them some questions to try and have a more comprehensive service, trying to find if there are other needs that that person has requested, and that was it. It had to do with a case. If they ask for something else, probably they would have to go to the office next door. Now, we only see housing subsidies here. For that information, for example, on disabilities, you need to go to that other office. The way that we're trying to do now is having a one-stop shop that allows for a full view of the family, and that allows for a more pertinent, accurate, specific service, and so that we can be a lot more proactive when detecting the needs that the family may have. So, let me connect this to Chile Cuida, which is the national support and care system. And it is very important for us to have this one-stop shop that what I have talked about, because we have different institutions that provide services to these caregivers, and we have we have them going from one office to the door, back and forth, and the way that we should actually think about this is that the user should go to Chile Cuida. We identify the caregiver, which also for us to be a caregiver, there has to be someone that requires receiving that care. So we talk about these duo, the person giving the care, but the person receiving the care. We identify them health-wise because probably these care receivers have some kind of certificate that they have some kind of dependency or have a medical diagnosis, or maybe from the social angle because the caregiver or the person that receives the care has requested some kind of help or is already enrolled in some social program. In the case of Chile Huile, this link is very important, and it's important for us to have this information at site so that we can have that first diagnosis. And then from there on, the rest of the different offers will be deployed both for the caregiver as well as for the care receiver. The person giving care has the right to have access to different programs, technical support, household support, so that we can open up all of that, all of those possibilities, but at the same time, we can then recognize caregivers acknowledge the social situation that they are in, but trying to find an offer that is relevant for them. For example, through programs related to mental health, also to ongoing support for the caregivers, but also community programs that we have been developing in order to try to promote the de-feminization of these type of activities. So the GSL becomes then very important when it comes to this, because since we're going to have access to the system through different pathways, different spaces where we can recognize a caregiver, but also the person that requires care, and being able to access these from the social, by the social workers, having access to all the consolidated information with the different administrative data that will allow them to say, this is the general situation for this family, for this household or group, allows us then to reduce the time associated to diagnosis, not duplicating work or diagnosis, or an excess of questions and an excess of paperwork requested in order to get to the same kind of situation. And this allows us to move forward in a system that promotes a more comprehensive service, which saves time and resources. We have then the integrated data. What are some of the services that they have already received? Alerts or warnings on some of the potential services that they can have access to. If with the administrative data, we can see that the person has a certain disability, then the first thing that we need to trigger is a warning, an alert, whether they have received the technical support that they may require. If they have, that will show up in the system. And if not, then we should have a management warning, a flag coming up saying that they can have access to those services, social reports, and everything else that is related to reporting. So the first view here is what we have called social screening that provides us the whole information that we can have access to in the system, and obviously information can be updated not only with the administrative data but also in the in-person service that is provided at that point in time. And then we can have case management in order to refer them to different spaces so that we can have a more systemic work between the social team at the municipality, the health team in the social post, also the education team if we see that there is any education or a school service that they may need. GSL works by modules. We have the base module, which is the social support, but then on top of that, we have been building different modules for the different spaces that these people can be referred to. So currently, we have a very limited spaces where, according to the different programs that we have, but we're working with the Ministry of Health, for example, in order to relate them to these programs. We have the Office for Women also included, education also there, the Office for the Elderly. And these then allows us for different professionals that provide services in different social programs can have access to centralized information, and then the patient can be referred as promptly as possible and have comprehensive, full information of the different services that are provided to these people. So what should we see? We should be able to see the information of the technical basis, also the detail of participation in different care programs. We should also see whether the person requires any national disability records, any disability pension. If the children are receiving the subsidies they should have access to, whether the boys and girls with special educational needs are having access to those educational supporting programs, or if the caregiver, for example, is part of the record in order to receive a per diem, and if there are any special needs programs for mental health or any other, we can then refer them as seamlessly as possible. So as I was saying then, the idea is that the different professionals in the different local spaces, which are many, health, social assistance, social support, education, can have access then, and then they can make the appropriate referral when providing the service, and then providing an answer not only or based on the question that they went to ask, but a more comprehensive approach that allows us to move forward so that we can have a system that is consolidated as a system as such, and not just different separated, isolated programs and that are disaggregated. You can't see it very well here, but this is almost like a screenshot of the information that is available. We can see the social record, we can see the family information, We can see what is the offer that they have received, but also some of the alerts of some of the programs that they could have access to, for example, sanitary or health use, immunization, risk, things that we can already see. For example, is that these social sanitary alerts, how caregivers tend to be quite late in terms of their medical checkups versus those who work at other places. And the person that requires help, we can see clearly in the social sanitary alerts that the person that requires help have the medical checkups up to date, they have received the appropriate vaccinations for influenza and others, and the caregiver has not. They do not have the gynecological medical checkup, have not received the appropriate vaccination. So these alerts allows us to have the appropriate management for the prevention for the caregiver and their health situation, which is something that we tend to see quite often.
This is really what we wanted to let you know in those aspects. I think I am still sharing my screen.
Compartiendo todavía. Muchas
Yes,
gracias,
you're still sharing your
Romy,
screen. Thank
por
you,
tu
Romy,
complejidad,
for
presentación,
your
por la
detailed
explicación.
presentation and the
Ambas dos,
explanation.
¿no?
It
De
has
lo que se
been
está
very
desarrollando en el marco
valuable
del Sistema Nacional de Apoyos
in
Integrados de
what
Salud
is being done
como
with
ejemplo de
Chile
práctica.
Cuida and this
Finalizando esta primera
interoperability,
dinámica
not only of the
del
program
antecedente y también
offer
de los
of what is
pendientes
existing, but
para
also
ustedes
the
desarrollar.
pending elements and what is needed in terms of
Hay
development.
algunas preguntas en
We have
el
some
chat
questions
que
in
se
the
hicieron a
chat
Verónica.
that were presented to
También
Veronica.
pueden dejar expresar las preguntas
You can also express all the
Romy en la
questions you might
presentación
have for Romy
recién.
in the presentation we
Paso a
recently
comentar
heard.
las preguntas
And I will start
que se han enunciado ya. Verónica
commenting
respondió de
on the
forma
questions. Veronica already responded
importante
some
para
of
que
them
fueran
directly in the
visibilizados los
chat,
tonos
but that
completos. Naomi
we would want
Demos
everybody to.
pregunta,
Naomi Demos is asking, or she's saying that the presentation was very interesting, and she asked about the definition of the primary and secondary caregiver, if it's by dedicated time or by those that make the decisions related to care. Claudia Rodriguez
preguntó si es que entendía bien, no
asked if she understood properly the explanation of this specific survey that was done between August and December, and if the data be presented in a reference year or for a smaller period of time, calculated these activities. Norma Navarro from INEGI, she asks about the difficulties of when found in recreating this care section and by the activity group in the identification for the whom or for who all this activity was going to be done. And given that there is a question for each person, how much time was applied for each person? She also asked whether if it is likely to have application of time, given what she presented, Veronica presented in terms of simultaneity. And in terms of the comparative results with 2015, if there is a significant change in average times per activity care. And how do you consider making a comparative analysis of how will you define whether or not there is comparability in these two periods of time, which is 2015, 2024. I don't know if you would like to sort of pan on all these questions, Veronica?
Dale, gracias, Evelyn.
Yes, no problem. Thank you,
A ver, la
Evelyn.
pregunta, Norma, son hartas preguntas.
Norma is
y es
asking,
bien
there are
complejo
many
escuchar.
questions and it is very complex when she's
Primero,
presenting,
como
yes.
dificultades que
First is
encontramos al realizar la situación
difficulties
de
that we
cuidados,
found when
justamente
recreating
la
the
parte de la
care
pregunta era
section.
temor de que
We were also
dificultades en el
concerned
manejo por
with
parte de los investigadores para
difficulties
poder
by
responderlo
the
correctamente
surveyor
y
when presenting
justamente por ello es
these
que
questions.
lo que
And this
hicimos
is why in the
una
pilot
reestructuración
project,
parcial primero.
we
Entonces, de
partially
esa manera también
restructured
podíamos ir
the whole
verificando
activity, and
si es
thus we
que
would be
se
able to
van entendiendo
verify
y fuimos
whether
haciendo
it is
eso,
being understood,
por
and we
ejemplo, a través de
started
los encuentros
doing so
con
when
funcionarios
having
anteriores a la
meetings
pregunta
with
anterior, pero
focal
también los
groups
investigadores para ir
after
indagando si
the collection of the
pregunta,
activities and if they
que,
had
por ejemplo,
difficulties
nos
with these
saltamos con el
questions.
número de errores,
We compared it with a number
que
of
también nos fueron
errors
saltando
of the
en ese
validation
conjunto.
that were
Entonces,
standing
desde
out
ahí
in
íbamos
those modules.
verificando
We
justamente
thus were
con malas
verifying
prácticas
together with
con
bad practices or
concepciones erróneas de ciertas cosas,
mistaken
y las fuimos
concepts of
identificando
certain
y en
elements
realidad
that
no
we were able
encontramos
to
casi
identify,
ningún
and we
problema durante la recolección
found
y
barely
no es que
no problems in
no
the
haga falta
collection of
hacerlo.
information by using this
De
new
hecho, al principio ya
restructuring.
nosotros,
And as a matter of
no sé, por lo
fact,
mismo
at the very beginning,
juntamos,
and for
digamos,
the
con
same
los
reason,
colegas del DANE
when we got together with
para
the colleagues
verificar
of
los diagnósticos
DANE
que ellos
and
habían
thus
detectado
verify if they
ciertas
had
anomalías
detected
para
anything or
tener atención,
anomalies or
digamos,
others,
al
and
momento
thus be able
de tener esta
to
recolección.
be
Pero la
careful with
verdad,
these
todo muy bien.
collection elements, but
Si
everything
bien
was
era poco intuitivo,
seen
lo que
very
funcionó
properly. It was really
fue lo más
not,
clave. Se
it was
hacía
very
bastante
intuitive.
fluido
I think
cómo
it was
preguntar
very
las preguntas.
fluid how to ask
Y
all
obviamente
these
además también
questions,
eso en una
etc. And the same thing
aplicación en la
for an
tablet se hace incluso
application in
más
the tablet. It is
amigable,
even
porque en el
far
fondo
more
tú ahí
friendly
también predeterminas a las
because
personas
you
que
can
pueden ser los
predetermine
receptores de
those
cuidado.
people that
Incluso
can
ahí ya
be
vas
the
seleccionando
receivers
a
of
las
care,
personas
and
con
you
que se
can
diagnostica
choose
recibir ese cuidado.
those people that can be
Entonces ya no te sale una
receiving
lista de
the
todos los errores que
caregiving.
tú
It is
das, sino que también
conditioned,
tú
and
tienes que ir rellenando el
you
número de
can
líneas y ya
really
los seleccionas simplemente.
fill
Entonces
in
queda
the
perfecto.
different areas, and it becomes very fluid.
Si es factible que haya una duplicación de tiempo,
Whether it's feasible for the
la hay,
duplication of
por
time,
supuesto que la hay,
yes, of
porque
course there is.
acá también yo creo que
Because
estamos
again,
frente a la
this
dificultad de que
is
seguimos sin muchas
related to the
habilidades.
difficulties
El hecho
of
de no ser diario también ahí altera
carrying out the different activities.
permite que
This
exista todavía
means
un poco el
that there
riesgo
is
de duplicar
still
un
the
poco el
risk
tiempo,
of double
incluyendo si
folding
casos en
the
que, por
timing
ejemplo, si
for
yo estoy
those
haciendo, por ejemplo,
cases.
actividades
If, as an
simultáneas
example, I am
quizás al
carrying
mismo
out
tiempo registrando
simultaneous
una
activities,
actividad,
maybe I will
también la
record
podríamos
it as
registrar
one
en otra
activity,
y
but it
enviarla
also can be
les hago
recorded
correcciones al
somewhere
mismo
else.
tiempo y
And the
justamente
truth is that I'm doing
por
it
lo
at
mismo
exactly the
el
same time and for
esfuerzo
the
y
very
tratar
same
de
reason.
capturar
There's an
justamente
effort of
las
trying to
actividades
capture the
cuidados.
simultaneous
Eso es
activities
un
for
desafío,
care.
yo creo que
And
todavía
that
es
becomes a
bien
challenge.
interesante que podamos
And it
revisar
is very
como región
interesting
incluso
to see how, as a
nosotros
region,
solucionamos
we
eso
can deal with all
principalmente
this because
revisamos
we are the
el
ones that
listado de
are
actividades
mainly using these
y es algo que puede ser
listing
sobre
of
todo bien
activities, and it
también
can
como para tener una
become something
alternativa
very interesting
a
to
los días
provide
de
with
ser
an
diario y que
alternative
podamos mostrar en el
to
fondo que el
the
listado también se puede hacer
daily
evolucionando
activities,
y
and we
ir
can
capturando.
show that in the
Los cuidados
list
sistemas de
we can
asuntos también
capture
puede ser
care
algo muy valioso.
simultaneously, which probably
Y
becomes
para
quite
no
valuable.
extenderme demasiado,
And so as not to extend
la
myself
última
too
pregunta
much,
de la
the
comparabilidad
last
es algo que
question of
justamente también tenemos
comparability
en
is
consideración
something
teniendo
that we
que hacer
have
los
taken
análisis
into
porque todavía
account. We
estamos
have
procesando
to go
datos,
through the
entonces todavía
analysis. We're still
quizás vamos a ir más
processing
en
data.
detalle
We
en
have
ese
not
análisis,
started
pero
looking
al
into
menos
detail
preliminarmente nosotros
of the
sabemos
analysis.
que
We
podrían existir
preliminarily know
diferencias
that there can be
respecto del año
differences
2015, pero lo bueno es
compared
que
to
como el
in
módulo también fue
2015. But
planteado de
what
una
is
manera que
so
era
good here
bastante
is that
flexible,
the
en el sentido
module
de
is
que
quite
como tú puedes
flexible
reconstruir ciertas
because
subpoblaciones, nosotros de
as
última
you
también
can rebuild the
podríamos
population, maybe
reconstruir
we can also
subpoblaciones
rebuild
que
the very same population
en el fondo
of
las
the
secciones de
or
cuidados
geographic yourself
del
the
2015.
section of care of Inut 2015.
Muchas gracias, Verónica.
Thank you, Veronica.
Hay algunas otras preguntas.
There are other
Fidel
questions as
Reynoso,
well. Fidel
a
Reynoso
los expositores
congratulates the
con respecto a la
speakers.
encuesta NUT en
And
particular.
with regard to the
Pregunta
specific
por la
question,
función de la
he
encuesta
is
para
asking
usted.
about the function
Es
of the
averiguar la
survey,
opinión del
whether it is
público con
to
respecto a tal
find the
tema.
opinion of the
Y en ese
public
sentido, ¿cuál
related to
cree que sean
certain
otras funciones
areas.
de las
And what do
encuestas?
you believe would be another function
Y
of these
Montserrat
surveys?
López
And
pregunta
Montserrat
específicamente
Lopez
para
is
Romy,
specifically
acerca del
asking for
GSL,
Romy.
si es que hay
She
alguna
talks about the
alerta
GSL, if there are
si
any
la persona es
alerts or
extranjera,
warnings if that person is a foreigner,
o si es que fuese necesario,
or whether it would
cómo,
be
digamos,
necessary
podría
and
proceder esta
how
derivación para la
to
oficina de
have this
migrantes o la
referral
oferta, digamos, relacionada.
working with the migrant
No sé
office
si
or
podría
the
pasar
related office. I don't
si le
know
damos la
who would
palabra a
like to
Romy
respond.
para volver
Maybe Romy,
con
we can
Verónica.
offer you the floor and then return to Veronica.
Justo ahí en el chat comentaba porque
Yes, in the
uno de los
chat I was
principales
mentioning
problemas
that
hoy
one
día
of the
en la
main problems or
geografía es que para la
difficulties that
población
we have
migrante tenemos muy
nowadays is
pocos
that for
datos y la
migrant
mayoría de nuestros datos
population,
están
we have very little
asociados
data because the data
a
is
la
related
cédula
to
de
the
identidad. Y
ID,
lo
to
que
the
pasa
national
es
ID in Chile.
que dependiendo del tiempo
therefore, depending on the time the person is living in Chile and the migrant situation, whether they're and we will have more information related to that ID number. Therefore, we have protocols that are related to local care where everybody has to be taken care of, and this referral is done or sent to the migrant office at local level. So they can really receive that care and to guide them. And the problem, if you wish, is that the data of the GSL will be far more limited. Probably we will not have access, as an example, whether they had received previous care or which is their situation to technical aid or their medical conditions, depending on how long they have been living in the country.
Perfecto.
That's perfect.
Sí. Habías respondido también ahí en el...
Yes, you had responded in the chat.
Y específicamente, Carmen pregunta
And
para seguir contigo.
Carmen is asking to continue with you, Romy. Carmen Alvarez is asking about the challenges that exist in terms of coverage to be able to reach these caregivers, the ones that are not coming to themselves. If there is a strategy being taken into account for these people. Yes, a very important problem we have nowadays is related to the acknowledgement of these caregivers as caregivers. The question presented previously about the primary caregiver, if I am dedicated to somebody that is under dependency and others, what we have been able to develop nowadays, and this is why this combination of the social sanitary element is important, is that probably we will be able to acknowledge that person that requires care, and therefore they will be going to the healthcare system rather than the caregiver if they are not coming forward. So it is right there. We have a link that is very important, and why GSL and the relationship with health is so important, because what will probably happen is that we will be able to acknowledge that person that requires care because we are identifying them in the healthcare system. And it is from there that we are able to identify the caregiver to determine whether it is a primary caregiver, of course, or not. And what we have done is that in the social household registry, we were able to incorporate the caregiver element. Therefore, nowadays, we already have information of the caregivers that we have been able to identify given this relationship of referrals between the social and the health element. It is here where we are able to say, okay, this is our first or whole universe of caregivers where we are starting to work with. And of course, much is missing in the area of this acknowledgement. And of course, we have to actively search for these people by those that require care and then be able to get to the caregiver.
Muchas gracias, Romy.
Thank you, Romy.
Hay un par de preguntas más.
There are a number of other questions.
Gabriela Oxume
Orsume is asking whether you can talk about the work of care within the households and outside of the home, meaning measurement and analysis. And Katia Brenes from the National Institute of Women in Costa Rica is asking whether the NUT survey is including time data used in the fully dependent caregiving environment. Just to be more specific in that element, we will offer you the floor, Veronica, with the other questions
Súper,
that
muchas
were
gracias.
lying
A
behind.
ver,
Thank
entiendo el
you.
orden. Primero, lo que comentaban.
What was mentioned?
La pregunta de arribita, ¿cuál era?
It was the other question.
Si cree eso, si el rediseño de la encuesta, considerando que la
Whether
función de la encuesta
redesigning the
es
survey,
determinar nuestro
considering that
proyecto
the idea
específico
is
tema,
to receive
¿cuál crees que sea
information
otra función de la
about a
encuesta?
topic on which would be another of the functions of the
Pues es algo bien
survey.
interesante porque de hecho
It is
justamente también
quite
ahí se
interesting
empiezan
because,
a
as a matter of
generar ciertos
fact,
vínculos
there
incluso
we
con
can
lo que es lo
start
clásico, la
seeing
política pública,
links
que
between the public
justamente
policy
mencionamos sobre el
and
sistema
what
nacional de
was
cuidado.
mentioned by
De hecho,
the
hay un
national
documento bien
care system.
interesante sobre
There's a very
organismos
interesting
de cuidado que en el
document
fondo van haciendo un
that talks about care, where they are taking into consideration the different needs and critical elements that were detected in terms of being a caregiver. And a very important element, time use, and expressing that they had no time for rest or for leisure. And it is very interesting to see how this can be seen from the perspective of care. And we find other dimensions that are so interesting. For example, how much time do caregivers take for leisure? It was very interesting to see, and I presented it as an important element to explore well-being.
Sobre las otras preguntas que se hicieron ahora, bueno,
The other questions in this area, and for Gabriel, thank you very much for your questions and comments. Now, with regard to the care within and outside of the household, we will always be asking about the participants in that household. So the caregiving and the module that is being redesigned is always focused in those people that are within that household. Those that do not belong to this household, we ask, we have, of course, questions related to care, but it's a different module because we are considering the voluntary module. This is domestic work, care, or others for different households. Therefore, there is a specific distinction along the questionnaire in this area.
But also, let's see, there was another question. Or I think I've addressed all of the questions that are for me. Yes, there was one question, but I believe that you've answered it because yes, depending caregivers. Yes, let's see. If they are dependent people and they are part of the household, we will also be asking them. And then what we do is that in order to identify them, we put together the short list of the Washington group, and then we ask if those people require help for their daily activities. And if they are totally dependent and they require support in these activities, in these daily activities, that's where we will ask even some additional questions for having precisely those characteristics. Okay, now I've addressed them all. No, thank you, Veronica. And if anybody else has any additional questions, you're all invited to write them in the chat pod. And there's another question for Romy. Kathy from Costa Rica is asking, in the framework of Chile Cuida, is there any work insertion, work inclusion model, especially for those that have the paid work? And also, is there a campaign or is there any kind of relationship with awareness campaigns, in terms of creating awareness in the more general level when it comes to co-responsibility?
Muchas gracias. Respecto a la inserción laboral,
right, work inclusion, yes. This is something that we have been doing. We have an institution called Chile Valora. And what it does is precisely to certify the different knowledge, the different skills that a person might have, which is not necessarily acquired through a formal process. It could also have been acquired through experience. For example, people who have been working at a given trade for many years and who have not received a formal training and therefore have no way of actually certifying that task. So Chile Valora is working in putting together different caregiver profiles, care for children, adolescents, for people with disabilities, because what we want to do is not only to acknowledge that there is a person who is a caregiver, but that also we can provide that person with a certain minimum basis as to their situation. Probably these are people who did not go through a formal training process, but that nonetheless have quite a lot of knowledge on the management of the different illnesses and situations, and can therefore help them we can certify that knowledge so that they can have access. And this is extremely important because we don't want to continue extending or promoting that this is only for females, for women, because this is not what we're trying to do. But what we do try is that for all of their knowledge and experience and skills that they have acquired, that they be acknowledged and recognized, because since it's unpaid household work, then obviously it's not recognized because it hasn't been acquired through a formal process, but this will allow us to start from a different basis because they will have some kind of training, some additional training, and they can now apply for certain jobs with a different kind of certification, which is better than having nothing. And then with this, we've also worked as part of the system on work with a presidential advising committee between different ministries, trying to see the different programs, the different support that we want to include as part of Chile Cuida. And this has to do with FOSIS, which is an institution in Chile that provides support for entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, helping them in training in different trades. And also we're thinking about women who in the rural areas. And what we also want to do is then to articulate certification on the one hand, but on the other hand also linking these with flexible work options or entrepreneurial approach. Remember that this is a country that I said at the beginning is very long and very dispersed. And if we're thinking about caregivers who live in the south of Chile, it's very important that we can reach them and try to support them in order to create entrepreneurial activities and not necessarily a formal work option, because the transportation times, just commuting time, just to begin with, it's going to be extremely long. So different approaches. Now, regarding co-responsibility, there's a huge challenge here from the point of view of awareness, but also we're moving forward in a project or in a program rather, where we already have its implementation in the different territories, which are the care community centers. It's a new program, and in fact, the opening of the first one will be in June in the north of Chile. And the idea is to give the different communities in the country the space so that they can have a center which provides services for the caregiver and for the care receiver also. And it's a community center because it is the community in the neighborhood participating in different instances so that we can create awareness and the importance that this is not only something that happens within the households, I take care of my mom, but also creating a community network with these centers that will have the support of professionals, but also the contribution of the neighbors, of the community members, that they can participate so that these can try to promote at a more local neighborhood level these spaces that create co-responsibility. Also, awareness activities that are a larger scope through some communication campaigns.
Muy bien, Romy, muchas gracias.
Very good, Romy. Thank you so
Hay
much.
dos preguntas más.
We
No sé
have
si las
two
respondamos
additional
ambas.
questions. Shall we ask them now?
Son también para ti, Romy, porque tienen
They're
que
also
ver con
for
Chile
you,
Cuida.
Romy, because they have to do with the program Chile Cuida.
Carlos Alberto Coca Muñoz
Carlos
pregunta
Alberto
si
Coca is asking
respecto a las personas cuidadoras, si el trabajo
regarding
remunerado,
caregivers,
si es
the
que se contempla
paid
alguna
work.
certificación o
Is
acreditación
there a
para que
certification
ellos
or
presten servicio de
accreditation
cuidado
considered for them to
relacionado a
provide
quienes
these
comentaban en
services?
unos
A little bit
minutos.
related to what you were
Y si,
just
bueno, la
saying.
respuesta es positiva,
And
¿cómo
if
se
the answer is a
ejecuta ese
yes,
proceso?
then how is this process carried out?
Otra consulta
And
es
another question
si es que se
is,
enlazan en Chile Cuida con alternativas
in Chile
estatales de
Cuida, is
cuidado
this
para
linked
población
with
infantil
the state
u
care
otras para
giving
satisfacer
for
la demanda
a children's
de
population
cuidado?
in order to satisfy the demand
¿Cómo
for
lo pueden
care?
solventar, ¿no?
And
Las
how can
familias.
these be
Acá hay un
taken
comentario
advantage of by the families? There's a comment here.
Nancy Llerena
Nancy Llerena.
que hay empresas donde
There
brindan
are
este tipo de
companies where
servicio
they provide these type
de
of
cuidador y
services
personas cuidadoras
of
con su
caregivers
currículum vitae, me
with their
tenemos el
resume
servicio de acuerdo
that
a su
guarantee
especialidad,
a good
en
service
cada su
according
condición, su
to
tipo
their
de servicio
specialty
requerirían
for the
cuidado, niños, niñas
population that
separadas,
may need
ancianas y
these
ancianos.
services, children, boys, girls,
Hay
or
una última
senior
pregunta que la voy a
population.
ampliar también.
And then there's one
Sería para
last question, and I would like to read this
o
because this one
comentarles.
is for Veronica.
Gabriel Axume, de
Gabriel
Honduras,
Axume from Honduras
comenta que están realizando
has
los
said
primeros pasos
that
del
they
proceso
are taking the first
para
steps in the
realizar su
process
primera
to
encuesta visual.
try and make to implement their
Perdón,
survey
INEGI Costa
on
Rica
time
les
use
contó de su
in
experiencia.
Chile. But Costa
Estuvo muy
Rica has
enriquecedora,
talked to them about
están
their
encantados
experience. It has
de que
been
puedan tener
very
una
helpful,
reunión, ¿no?,
and
con
they would
este
like
tipo de
to have
entes
a
para también
meeting with
conocer su
the
experiencia. La
NSI
pregunta
team in
está ahí,
Chile. It's actually not a question,
se
it's more a
puede
comment, but you
relevantar.
may
Sí, de todas
still
maneras,
address
ahí
it.
nos podemos poner en contacto.
Sure, let's get in contact.
Te damos la palabra, Romy, si quieres
Romy, then,
completar algo con estas últimas
maybe you
preguntas
want to
que están relacionadas, ¿no?,
round off
como
these last
a
couple
ideas
of
de
questions that
servicio,
have
de
to do
certificación
with the
de las
services with
personas cuidadoras.
certification of
A propósito
caregivers.
de la feminización también que hablabas hace unos minutitos.
Sí, es un poco parecido a lo que comentaba antes.
Yes, it's
Efectivamente,
similar to what I was
estamos
saying just
trabajando en
before,
justamente
because
poder
what we're
tener estos
working on
perfiles
is
de
in
distintos tipos
developing
de
these
cuidados para poder
profiles,
entregar la
different types
certificación
of
a las
care in
distintas
order
personas
to
cuidadoras
provide
y vamos a
certification
partir
for
de
the
esto con
different
aquellas
caregivers.
cuidadoras
And
no
we're going to
remuneradas
start with
que
those
trabajan en los
paid
distintos servicios
caregivers
sociales
that
que
are
tenemos
working
nosotros
in
desde el
different
Estado.
services that
Tenemos
we are
programas
already
sociales que
providing from
entregan
the
una
state. We have
atención a personas que
programs
requieren
that
cuidado.
provide
No sé,
services to people
Senama
who
el Centro
require
Nacional de Adultos
support.
Mayores
For
tiene
example,
un programa
Senama
que
for
hace atención
the senior
domiciliaria
population
de personas
has a
mayores y
domestic
por lo tanto
service
me
for the
interesa mucho que
elderly,
todas esas
and therefore we're
cuidadoras estén
highly interested
certificadas.
for
Me
all
interesa
of
mucho que
those
todas las cuidadoras
caregivers to
trabajen
be fully
totalmente
certified.
certificados.
Also in the
También
local
los
care and
casos que
support
una ONG social
networks,
contrata
with a
cuidadoras
state help, they
de
hire
respiro, por decirlo de alguna manera,
caregivers
en el fondo o de relevo para
as a
algunas familias.
substitute
Esas
for
también están bajo
families.
certificación. Por lo tanto, la idea
We
de
are
tener estos
interested in having
perfiles
them
es que ojalá
certified too.
pudiera
So the
acceder
idea of having these
personas
different
también
profiles is to have
trabajando como
different
cuidadoras en
people
regímenes
having access,
regulados
people that are
en
working
distintas casas
paid as
y las
caregivers
personas además
in
de esas
households,
cuidadoras y que no
and
reciben
also
plata por extra,
caregivers that
eso
are
les va a permitir entonces
unpaid,
poder tener una
but this will
certificación
allow us
para
to have
acceder
a
a
certification
una
to have
política de cuidado.
access to employment
Respecto a los servicios
possibilities.
de cuidado
Now,
asociados a niños y
regarding care
adolescentes,
for children and
efectivamente
adolescents,
nosotros
well,
hoy día
yes,
desde
we
Chile
are
Cuida estamos
from
con un
Chile
foco
Cuida
inicial
putting a focus
en personas que tienen
on
algún tipo de
people that
dependencia
have some
moderadas y
kind of
particulares, por
dependency,
lo tanto,
whether
muy
it is
enfocado en niños y
mild,
adolescentes con algún
moderate,
tipo
or
de dependencia o
severe, with
discapacidad,
the
personas con
children then that
dependencia y
have different
personas
types of
adultas con
dependencies,
dependencia.
and even the
Sabemos
elderly
que
too.
las
So
niñeces, por decirlo de alguna
we
manera, en
know
general,
that
sobre todo menores a 5 años,
childhood,
tienen
especially
respuestas de
below
cuidado de
5 years of
manera
age, have
permanente.
ongoing permanent
Pero
care
digamos que en Chile, y es un
requirements. But
contexto que es muy particular
since
de
in
nosotros,
Chile, and this is something
en
that's very
Chile nosotros
particular
hoy
to
día
this
estamos en el
country,
proceso de
in
implementación
Chile,
de la
we're in
ley
the
de
process of
prácticas de la
implementing
niñez
the law
a través de la
of
creación de la
guarantees
subsecretaría de la
for the
niñez y
children
luego del
through the
sistema social
Undersecretariat of
para la
Childhood and
inclusión
New Services,
de
not
niños,
only
por ejemplo,
associated
niños y niñas que
to
han vivido
protection
vulneración de
for
derechos, sino que
boys and
también
girls
todo
who have
lo promocional
seen their
a
rights
niños y niñas
breached,
y
but
con la
also the
instalación a nivel local
participation
entonces
and the
de este
local
sistema de
setting
garantías
up
de la
of
niñez
these
y que van a
guarantee
ser dos
childhood
sistemas que
system.
van a, por
We are going
decirlo
to
de alguna
have then
manera,
two systems
confluir.
that will
Y por eso
merge,
quizás no hablamos
and
tanto de niñez
and
hoy
then
día
we
del
don't talk
desarrollo de Chile
about the
Cuida, porque
childhood
finalmente son,
in the Chile
vamos
Cuida,
a tener esa
because what we're going
intersección,
to have is we're
pero
going to have this
estamos como
overlap.
país
And
implementando el
as a
sistema de
country, since
garantías, la
we're
verdad es que
implementing the guarantee
en ese
system,
espacio en el cual
it is
pienso el
there
cuidado de
where
niños,
we're
además
going
entendiendo que
to
nosotros
actually address a
hemos
caring
avanzado
for
mucho tiempo
children.
ya para los
And
niños
we've
mayores
already
de
moved
5
forward
la
for children
escolarización
over
y ese
5,
espacio ya existe.
schooling
Estamos
also.
trabajando, bueno,
These are
tenemos
spaces that
también
are already in place,
las
and
alacunas
we're
de
working
educación, pero
in
también tenemos la
daycare
oferta
centers.
flexible asociada a
But we also
cuidados, por
have a
ejemplo, a niños
flexible
menores de
offer, for
5 años
example, for
con algunos
children under
programas que
5 years
son
of age with certain other
distintos,
programs
ya
that may be
la educación
different,
formal, sino que de
which is
cuidados.
not formal education, but
Entonces,
it's rather caregiving.
por eso
So
quizás en la
this is why
presentación yo no hablo tanto de
maybe
niñez,
in the presentation I
porque
really do not
estamos
talk
bien
about
asociados y
childhood, because
entendemos que la
it's
mayoría de
more
estos niños y niñas deberían estar yendo a la
because
escuela
those
y que de
children
alguna
should
manera
be
a
going to
posterior
school and
también
should be
está
getting the
como
necessary help
cubierto
through
dentro del
that.
programa.
it's covered from a different angle. But it is different with people that have dependencies. People that are dependent, the measures that we have at a government level are actually very seldom. We do not have many daycare centers. There are no real spaces that allow for a person that is dependent to be well taken care of, so that it is not necessary to have a full-time caregiver with them. So that's where we're putting our focus.
Bien, muchas gracias, Romy.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much, Romy, for clarifying and for answering those questions. And allow me to make a brief comment so that then we can pass it on to Karen, which I believe is very important. How this information has become quite supplementary. The measurements, like the national survey on the time use, but also the administrative records, supplementary information, which can all come together and based on the experience from Romy and the Ministry of Social Development and Family. So the opportunity and the need of this complementarity is tremendous because this survey allows us to have this update, and together with the module that was mentioned by Veronica, and having the good measurement and quantification of the people that require help on the one hand, but that are also the people that are providing this care, with the idea that both have been mentioning, and which is tangible in the public policy, which is creating the right profile so that we can respond as a system. I think that that's an important driver, the complementarity of these two systems or components, especially taking into consideration what Karen said at the beginning, information systems that are part of a broader scope. The different experiences that we can have from these two elements can be quite helpful. So I don't know if there are any additional questions or comments.
Muchos agradecimientos.
Thank you
Así
very
que
much
nuevamente
again.
muchas gracias
And
a Romy y a Verónica.
thank
Y
you,
ahora
Romy
vamos a
and
pasar
Veronica. And now I would like
al
to
cierre de
offer
la
the floor
actividad.
to Karen for
Muchas gracias,
to end
Evelyn.
this activity. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Dos
Evelyn.
preguntas adicionales en
We
el
have
chat,
two additional
pero yo
questions in
les
the
invito
chat,
a que
but I
continuemos
would
este
like to
diálogo a
invite you
través
to
de la
continue with
comunidad.
this
Los
dialogue
saludamos
through the
y
community.
quisiera,
We'll
antes de
take note of
cerrar,
this. And
ver si
prior
hubiera
to
alguna
closing, I would like to
comentario
know
para
if
conversar.
Romy or Veronica have additional ending comments.
No por mi parte, pero muchas gracias por la
No,
invitación.
thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation.
Sí, también muchísimas gracias por la
Same here.
invitación.
Thank you very much for the invitation. What is so interesting about this opportunity is that we are in a process of creating the system. There
Cómo vamos integrando, por ejemplo, a niños y niñas o adolescentes
children
que hoy día son
or
cuidadores. Tenemos un gran
adolescents that are
desafío con personas
caregivers. We have a
adultas
tremendous
y muchos
challenge with
niños
those
son
people that
cuidadores
are
porque muchas
dependent
familias
and that
están
are
acompañando
caregivers
de
as well. We
forma
have many
de
couples
dependencia y
where
tenemos una
that are the
linda
elderly, and both are under dependency, and maybe one of them
del
is the
Servicio Nacional
caregiver
de
of the other.
Discapacidad.
With the
Hemos
National
visibilizado también, por
Disability Service,
ejemplo,
we have
los
been
desafíos
able
que
to
tienen
visibilize
madres
the
con cosas de su
challenges that
discapacidad y que tienen
mothers
niños chicos.
that are
Entonces,
with
hay
disabilities
muchísimo
with
espacio
small
todavía
children, we see that
de
there is
discusión y de
many
diseño, y
different
la
areas for
experiencia
discussion
internacional
and
también a
design,
nosotros
and
nos
the
ayuda
international
muchísimo
experience
a
for us is
pensar cuál va a ser
quite
entonces
helpful
esa
in
oferta
thinking
comunitaria
of
para
what
cada uno
the
de esos
proper
adultos.
offer
Muchísimas gracias
for
por la
these
invitación.
groups. And thank you again very much for the
No,
invitation.
muchísimas gracias a ustedes. Les
No, thank
agradezco a
you.
los funcionarios
I
del
want to
Instituto Chile para
thank
Chile
all
por
of
compartir con
the
nosotros su
officers of the
experiencia
government of
hoy.
Chile for
Es
sharing
muy
their knowledge.
valioso poder tener de la mano
Today here,
expertos
it is very valuable to have
esta
these experts with
narrativa de
us
cómo se están
to
generando
hear all the
estadísticas
information
robustas
on
y
how
relevantes
the
en la región.
robust statistic is being
En primer
generated
lugar,
in the region.
puedo cerrar recordando
And
cómo las
by
encuestas de
closing, we
uso
would
del
like to
tiempo
remind
han
ourselves how
sido
the
las
time
más
use surveys
habilitadoras
have been one of the most
diagnosticar y
important
comprender en las
statistics
agendas
in
públicas la importancia de
understanding in the
generar
public
esas
agenda the
políticas que
importance of
redistribuyen
generating
el
this
trabajo de
policy that
cuidados con
redistribute
perspectiva de
the
género.
work as
Y
care
también,
with
bueno,
a gender
estaremos
perspective.
esperando
And
los
also, we will
resultados
be expecting the
con mucha
results,
apertura
and
para
we
continuarlos divulgando
really
y para
want to
ver
continue
cómo están las
with their
situaciones de los
promotion and see
cuidados
how the situation of the unpaid care is working in Chile after the pandemic. As well, it has been a tremendous pleasure to exchange with all the participants in all of the details and modifications of the form that we see that have been fully tested. And it has been very valuable as well to see how the registry, given the development ministry, have this tremendous potential to work with the different data sources and to be able to feed a real-time information. It is very valuable for the different purposes of public policies and for the publication of the health analysis. I am closing then by thanking the different panelists, moderators, and participants with an invitation to be part of the community of practice, which is a platform where we have different spaces to continue placing all these questions on the table, and you're all invited by the organizations that you are representing to the chats and emails that you can write to, and to become part of the databases for the promotion of all these events. And the invitation is also open. Should any of the participants be able to share the experience of their own organizations and experiences that are being carried out, and the countries of the region have questions in the creation of these integrated care systems. So have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you very much to all.
Muchas gracias, que estén muy bien.
Thank you very much. Hope you're all doing great.
Buen día.
Muchas gracias, buen día.
Chao.